Phone check. 1, 2. The microphone check. 1, 2, 1, 2. The microphone check. I got my headphones tuned between two different AM stations, and my briefcase is full of declassified information. Declassified. Declassified.
Good evening and welcome to News from Neptune for the 37th week of 2014. For more than 20 years, this program has been a spontaneous and unrehearsed discussion on the news of the week and its coverage by the media. First on a so-called community radio station, and when censored and locked out of there, welcomed, I'm happy to say, by the good people at Urbana Public Television, who are responsible for the only complete clip of last week's news conference at the University of Illinois. Jason Liggett, our director and producer, braved the crowd and brought that to an unsuspecting world. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight are David Green and Ron Zoke. Our program's name, News from Neptune, was chosen to honor Noam Chomsky, who's been talking sense about American politics for more than twice the quarter century we've been on the air. Chomsky has said in the American media, quote, either you repeat the same conventional doctrines everybody is saying, or else you say something true, and it will sound like it's from Neptune. Our format is to take turns suggesting stories that have been ignored or misreported, occasionally even innocently, and then having our colleagues comment on them. Previous programs are archived on YouTube and posted to our Facebook page for News from Neptune, where you'll also find comments from viewers, not all unadulterated praise, and some answers from us. I can be reached at carl@newsfromneptune.com and on Facebook. I'm happy to receive your comments. It's September 12th. We've been recalling the crimes of 9/11/2001 this week, but Noam Chomsky observed about 9/11 some time ago, quote, suppose that on 9/11 the planes had bombed the White House. Suppose they'd killed the president, established a military dictatorship, quickly killed thousands, tortured tens of thousands more, set up a major international terror center that was carrying out assassinations, overthrowing governments all over the place, installing other dictatorships, and driving the country into one of the worst depressions in its history so that they had to call in the state to bail them out. Suppose that had happened. In fact, it did happen on the first 9/11 in 1973. It happened in Chile, just the way Chomsky described it. And the United States is responsible for it, and we do not remember that as 9/11. It was remembered only in a few places this week. The Nuremberg Tribunal, after the Second World War, declared specifically that aggression, invasion by its armed forces, by one state of the territory of another state, quote, is the supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes, and that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. In other words, it's worse than terrorism. The chief U.S. prosecutor at Nuremberg, Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, forcefully insisted at the time that the tribunal would be mere farce. This was the tribunal that was trying Nazi leaders at the end of the Second World War, if we did not admit that its principles apply to ourselves as well. So this week we heard the American president announce that, quote, invasion by its armed forces of the territory of another state was underway. And that was what, of course, we hang people for at Nuremberg. So you're watching News from Neptune, a worse than terrorism edition. And we'll begin tonight with David Green from the University of Illinois, where incivility seems to be considered worse than terrorism. David?
Thank you. I'm going to make a few comments, unsurprisingly, about the case of Stephen Saleta, and as it has played out in the last week. I've written an article, a kind of summary article and contextual and perspective article that appeared on Mondoweiss this past Tuesday and is still easily accessible, I believe, on the front page of that website, in which, in order to perhaps just counter what I thought to be more of an emphasis, I mean, as important as the issue of academic freedom is, and as important as it is, an issue as it is in terms of the way this case will legally play out, I think it was important to kind of counter that with the perspectives of why this case has gotten to the point that it has. And in the title of my article was something to the effect of, what is the question in the case of Saleda? It's the question of neoliberalism, of Palestine, neoliberalism, and the corporate university. I think all of those things need to be well understood to understand how we got to this point. I mean, Phyllis Wise, when she found out that there was going to be pressure on her to not have Professor Saleda hired, she could have immediately said, I'm sorry, but I won't go there. I will not overrule this decision that has been made through proper departmental administrative means, been vetted all the way through the deans and the provost, and should be subject to the same routine approval by me and passing along to the Board of Trustees for their routine approval, which would have happened after he had already been on campus teaching, just as has happened with dozens of other faculty members whose appointments were doubtless approved yesterday while they have already set up shop. So why did it get to that point? Why did Phyllis Wise not see fit to say, I won't draw that line? It certainly couldn't have been because she was afraid of what the consequences would be. If she had firmly said, either this appointment goes through or I will resign, it certainly would have gone through. And if it had gone through in that way, it would have, the donors and the pressure groups probably would have backed down, and Stephen Saleda would be teaching on this campus. There would be one more voice, albeit a unique voice, a pro-Palestinian voice from someone who is of Palestinian background and who is also has an appointment in which he may deal not directly, but at least as a part of his purview with the Israel-Palestine conflict in the context of settler colonialist studies, of studies of indigenous people, which was the idea of his hiring in the first place by the Indian Studies Department at this university. So why didn't this happen? So there are many reasons, but I guess the one that I would propose and that I would want your reaction to has to do with Israel and being Jewish in a certain way, being a Jewish supporter of Israel and of the United States' relationship with Israel and of the university's relationship with Israel. All of that is a kind of signifier for class privilege in this country, how important that has become, how that identification, for various reasons, has become so important that it can't be ignored when it is raised, when the prospect of hiring someone who has dissented from the importance and the sort of sacredness of that signifier, why this provokes this sort of reaction where Phyllis Wise and the Board of Trustees is willing to go to the wall and put the university in the negative light nationally, which it has, to provoke the ire of many faculty, which it has, why it's willing to go there. And I just want to, I don't really have the answer to that, but I want to suggest that this signifier of Israel and of Zionism and of the relationships of elite groups in this country to what Israel signifies in terms of privilege and of foreign policy and of U.S. power is so important that apparently that can't be done, and that it's without even a whole lot of thought that these events will play out. So that's the comment that I will put on the table, and take wherever you might want to go with that.
I'm not quite sure I'm following you, David. You're suggesting that the contretemps around Professor Salaita arose because of the settled ways of doing things at the university that were challenged in this case, and that's unusual. I mean,
well, usually these things go on behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm.
It's never gotten to the point yet where someone of Palestinian background was hired to address the topic of Palestine.
But I thought you were suggesting that it had more to do with the university and the university's notion that what we say goes, rather than the specific case of Palestine. Could the same thing have happened on another contemporary issue?
I would just say that it's no accident that it happened on this issue.
Yes,
I mean, this is the most hot button issue. This is the issue in which it seems as if there is a willingness to be incredibly arrogant, to go so far as to deny academic freedom. Perhaps this is symbolized by someone like Kerry Nelson, who, despite his alleged support for academic freedom and his tenure as president of the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, on this issue, is siding with the right-wingers, with the Zionists, with the Israel lobby, with the trustees, with those who would sort of willy-nilly violate academic freedom in this way.
Is there any other issue that's nearly as fraught as this one?
That's what we're wondering.
To
use your favorite word.
Well,
it's a good word, unfortunately.
Fraught. Yeah. I think it's the New York Times favorite word. I don't know if it was mine, but yeah, you're implying that this issue is fraught. There's the perception that there are lines you don't cross in terms of criticism of Israel, and that there are Jews. There's the Israel lobby, and that there are Jews out there, including locally, who will push back against that, because that's happened in the past. There has been a lot of pushback by the local Jewish institutions in relation to any uprising of pro-Palestinian solidarity on this campus. It's interesting to me how few local Jews are signing these statements that are appearing in the newspaper. And I think people should ask themselves, who is it that these mostly non-Jews, who is it that they feel that they are in solidarity with? Who they feel that they are defending? I'm not saying, I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but I mean, anybody who wants to read what I have to say about this in a more straightforward way can read my article. I've had 2 articles on Mondoweiss about that. And you can read all the other things that are being said on Corey Robin and so forth. But I'm just trying to get at something a little bit different locally as to what the perception is of all these people who, that there really hasn't been any upsurge among Jews as a group. I mean, there's a few familiar voices. You can almost predict who those voices would be. About a dozen people, maybe 15, at the most 20 Jewish people locally who are signing this letter of 200, 250, 300 people that have now signed. We could also talk about the relation. Why is it that the pro-Phyllis Wise letter is being signed by the hard science people, and that the protest is coming primarily from liberal arts people, especially history? I think that's something to be talked about on this campus, and will be talked about on this campus. But back to the Jewish issue, it's like all these people, the mayor. The mayor of Champaign, Don Gerard. Not to pick on him necessarily.
Why not?
But all of the Champaign Country Club people, all all the
Yes.
all the developers, all the Busey Bank people.
Right.
What is it that brings all these people? I mean, they're defending Phyllis Wise. I mean, this started
Yes.
out as the case over one person being hired.
Right.
Okay. All of a sudden, and all those people are asking is, we would like to see this man hired. They're not attacking Phyllis Wise. They're asking her to change her mind. So why has trying to get Phyllis Wise to change her mind and the Board of Trustees to change their mind, why has that become an attack on Phyllis Wise and this circling the wagons around Phyllis Wise?
And what's your answer to that?
Around Israel. I mean, I think it's a matter of people, like I said here last week, it's class privilege. It's people invoking, people that somehow are feeling threatened. I mean, at one level, at a kind of national level, the word that's been thrown around lately is that the Israel lobby is losing control of the narrative about Israel post Gaza. Okay, but locally, I think these people are. I mean, Israel is part of what they're about, but they're not identified as supporters of Israel. I don't see them as caring about Israel in that way. They care about what supporting Israel is a part of. And
which is corporate control of the university. And
exactly.
And this is a challenge to that corporate control in a way that they really haven't experienced since Vietnam.
Yeah. And apparently, if you really do a little digging, and I want to do a little more digging, Phyllis Wise has apparently been there. I mean, Richard Herman was no slouch in corporate relationships. He brought in this consulting from the Ewing, Marion Kauffman Foundation and all of the relationships between the research and the high tech and entrepreneurship. And you could see that, and you can find names in some of those documents that are the same names on these lists of people supporting her. But Phyllis Wise and her life partner, who she brought with him, who works directly with these relationships with the Tech Center and Research Park and entrepreneurship and all that. This has become a very complex neoliberal corporate web, which all of these people are feeding off of. They're the ones doing the deals. They're renting they're developing the property. They're building the buildings. They're restructuring. They're providing the loans. I mean, there's a whole business aspect to the way. I mean, I'm not saying anything that most people don't understand, but all of these people are part of that. And if you look at that Google document that's been added to, that people are going on with all these names, and people are able to add and highlight who these people are and how they relate to this neoliberal corporate university. So again, I think it's there. When Phyllis Wise was attacked about Israel, they circle the wagons around her. They make it about her instead of about Israel and Palestine,
which is to make it about corporate control of the university.
Yeah.
And if this slips out at this point, where's it going to stop? Are we going to have to listen to students about how they don't want to be caught in a debt trap to go to this university? Are we going to have to listen to faculty about being able to speak freely, using the principles of academic freedom on other issues? We can't have that. Yeah. And therefore, if the writ runs here, suddenly the corporate university has a lot of other things to be embarrassed about.
Yeah,
you agree, Ron?
Yeah. Well, my guess about what happens, no more than that, is that somehow some wealthy Jewish businessmen who have been donors to the university got wind of this. And they apparently sent an email or called up someone in the foundation. The foundation people went to Chancellor Wise, and she panicked, and but then had to invent some other rationale other than we might lose money for dealing with this. And looking at the tweets, saw all this bad language and so on, and said to herself, well, that's what we can use.
That was all brought to her. The chancellor was not reading Professor Salaita's tweets until they were made available to her,
that's
so to
right.
speak.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah. So there's this deception going on about what was really behind this. It was the initial panic, I think, and then the need to save face and never admit that it was donor objections to this guy who was expressing deviant opinions about Israel and the Palestinians.
We should be clear, though, that an important point was made by the lawyer from the Center for Constitutional Rights at the beginning of the news conference that was recorded here by UPTV. Maria LaHood said that in just the last few years, there have been over 200 cases of people at universities being reprimanded, fired, or even litigated against for making anti-Israel statements.
Yeah.
She argued that this is a sign of a persistent attempt to silence critics of Israel in American higher education. And it's not limited to faculty by any means, by the way. Palestinian Solidarity Legal Support will be publishing a study on this in the next month. Now, I mean, it seems to me that David's point about that this has more to do with, this has a great deal to do with the structure of the university and the university's role in contemporary society, which is a nefarious one in many ways. But it's also the case, it has to do with the propaganda campaign in this country by the Israel lobby and by, in fact, apparently the Israel government itself, their Hasbara campaign, to counter criticisms of Israel. And if it was the malign conjunction of these two trends, I think, that produced this particular case.
Yeah. Well, this has become a kind of signifier, I think, locally of upper middle class status. I mean, respectability. And
this university?
Yeah. By turning it into an issue of a popularity contest. Do you like more Stephen or Phyllis? And we have between 400 and 500 people signing these statements in the local newspaper saying we support Phyllis.
But they trivialize the issue
Yes,
when they put it, of course, obviously in terms of civility, rather in terms of the real interests in politics and power that is behind this. And that's what has to be exposed, and that's what, in a sense, they're just asking for this stuff to be exposed by signing their names, putting them all in one place, and it's like a lesson in I keep thinking of G. William Domhoff, Who Rules? He's the famous sociologist at University of California, Santa Cruz, who writes the book Who Rules and the website Who Rules. And this is who the power structure is, and the hangers-on, the people who have to people who have the money, the power, the politicians who have to please them, the professors who either want to please them or feel that there's something in it for them to please them, like Nicholas Burbulis and Joyce Tolliver, just that everybody is revealing sort of which side are you on, and where the twain meets, so to speak, in terms of what you're referring to, Carl, is the corporate relationships, is the relationship between Israel. There's a faculty member from Israel with the kind of entrepreneurial and high-tech background that you would expect to find in these people, and connections to universities in Israel, which is what the whole ASA, American Studies Association, boycott was about a few months ago, severing some of these ties, especially the technological ties and the ties that specifically have to do with weaponry and surveillance and so forth, that ought to be questioned in terms of the institutional relationships. These are all the kinds of things that go on that connect Israel, U.S. foreign policy, the neoliberal university, and the greasy hands around here, the sort of the greasy entrepreneurial hands around here who, maybe some other time I'll bring in a little thing from the website of the people who deal with this entrepreneurial stuff, because superficially it's just vapid stuff. It's all this business speak and all this process speak about how you develop these relationships that kind of just sanitize everything. But of course there's some substance there, and the substance has to do with who's making money off the research that goes on around here.
Well, and the substance also has to do with the neoliberal counterattack of the last 40 years. I mean, when we point out that the parallels to this particular case were cases of faculty who were silenced or fired or excluded and so forth for their objection to the Vietnam War, what we're recalling is that the counterattack to the 60s, signaled by things like the Trilateral Commission's Crisis of Democracy, was the neoliberal attempt to put down the sorts of questions about the activities of universities that arose during the 60s and to move the universities back into a corporate model and faculties back into a quiescent position. It worked. Neoliberalism, gathering steam in the 70s, produced a quiet university through the Bush-Obama wars in Southwest Asia. Now, this looks like bringing back those bad old days that the neoliberal counterattackers thought they had got rid of entirely, the bad old days of university objection to political matters in general, as well as those specifically involving university, as you described, David.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that both contexts should be noted. The context of the Israeli attempt to shut down criticism of Israel's actions in the recent massacre and more widely. That's one. And the other is this defense of the corporate university with which the local corporate elite is very much involved.
Well, there's also a local history of intolerance and attempting to eject people who say things that the local elite don't like. Going back to the economics department in the late 1930s and the struggle over Keynesianism and the attempt to get rid of those people. George Stoddard, the president of the university, was fired in the mid-1940s, presumably because of his what was then called liberal and internationalist views, which were not happily received. And then there's the Leo Cook case, K-O-C-H, about 1959 to 60, who wrote a letter to the Daily Illini kind of condoning sexual relations between students. And that really set off a enormous furor. I mean,
That needed to be condoned?
yeah, right. But, well, it seems incredibly quaint today.
Yeah.
But there's a long history of this.
Yes. But, and, I guess I get back to the question of why is it that they perceive that they would want to go to this trouble to get rid of somebody who probably wouldn't have made that much of a difference
That's the question.
on this campus?
Right.
I mean, who could have maybe? I mean, I would have been excited that he was here to meet him. I would have thought maybe this was an opening, and I would have tried to put the best possible face on it. But these changes in the larger situation aren't going to come from the hiring of one person on this campus, and they didn't have a whole lot to worry about. And so the question is, are they, if they're so worried about this, what are they really worried about?
Yep.
And is it really something that they should be worried about, or is it just that ruling classes are so afraid of the people and so afraid of any change whatsoever that they shoot themselves in the foot and create a reaction and potentially a real sea change when there didn't have to be one?
I hope it's the former.
Yeah.
You're watching News from Neptune. We have been talking about some local concerns that seem to branch out far beyond the local concerns and bring up some important other questions. We'll go to Ron Zoke and talk about the fact that while this is going on, the U.S. is busily killing people for terrorism in various parts of the world.
Yeah, I prefer to deal with that kind of question on our other show on Tuesdays, but let me say a few words about the economic condition of this country. Headline, local papers, stagnant pay, still the market's weak spot. So the U.S. job market has steadily improved pretty much on every gauge except one Americans probably care about most, pay. The unemployment rate has sunk. Employers have added a robust 2.5 million jobs over the last 12 months. Layoffs have tumbled, yet most people are still waiting for a decent raise. So this curious contrast between what the broader economic conditions seem to be and why so many people are not getting paid anymore. Others say that wages have lagged because millions of people are still out of work, many of whom aren't counted in the unemployment rate. Others say they fear pay has stagnated because of trends that will persist even after the economy has moved closer to full health. They've noticed that companies are making more use of temporary and part-time workers, usually at lower pay, to replace full-time permanent jobs. A survey of Harvard Business School graduates released Monday lends weight to that notion. Nearly half the respondents said they would rather invest in technology than in workers. Just over 40% expect wages and benefits to decline over the next 3 years. Economists are flummoxed by the way that historical relationship between pay and unemployment has eroded since the recession ended. Based on historical trends, the steady drop in unemployment should have raised inflation-adjusted wages by 3.6% in June, according to researchers at the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, and that tie has been broken somehow. So economic conditions on the whole seem to be getting better gradually, and yet nobody is seeing any increase in their pay. So they can't buy those things that are needed to make the economy revolve. Another headline, curiously, consumer sentiment in U.S. rises to the highest in 14 months. American consumer confidence rose to its highest level in more than a year in September as households' views on the outlook for the economy brightened. So what do you make of this? I mean, it seems...
I've always wondered what to make of these. Why we're told. I mean, we're told this. We're told how much is in the stock market, how the stock market is doing,
Right.
even though it only affects 5 or 10% of the people. We're told about consumer confidence, as if that means. I mean, as if what people think about the whole. I mean, I guess it's arguable that what people think about the economy means they're going to go out and spend money. But then again,
Exactly.
you know, whatever marginal differences there might be in these consumer confidence indexes couldn't possibly indicate anything that important about what is actually going to happen in terms of how much money is actually going to be spent. I mean, it isn't a very scientific or indicative way of understanding how it is people are going to behave. The only thing that one can look at, as you properly point out, is do people see their wages rising? Do they feel secure in their jobs? Do they want to spend money knowing that they're going to still be making some? So we live in a time, you know, this word precariat that we've used before. We live in a time of tremendous insecurity, and people live from month to month, year to year, making decisions, not really knowing what's in store for them, and that's been a drag on the economy.
And there's finally something quite circular about the media telling us the economy is getting better, and then going ask people, do you think the economy is getting better? Yeah. And people say, yeah, I heard it on the news. The economy is getting better.
Yeah, there is that. Definitely.
I'm in bad shape. I've lost my job. You know, I can't make ends meet, but everybody else seems to be doing okay. I mean, this is nothing new. It's always been a standard rhetorical device going back. We find plenty of examples of this being discussed during the Depression, where people are made to believe that if they're having economic problems, it's their fault in some way. They haven't been good enough in their job interviews or something of that sort. Because of course the country is doing well. Companies are doing well. The stock market's up. So if you've lost your job, if your standard of living has declined, whose fault's that got to be? It's got to be yours, right?
The question then is, why isn't there more resistance to the war that's being declared in the Middle East?
Very good question.
I think it's kind of dim perception all around that, well, war is the health of the state, and war is good for business. And a lot of people half realize that, I think, but being unable to face that thought in all of its implications, I suppose.
I think you have to remember the famous advice to Harry Truman after the Second World War, when the problem was how to get the Cold War going, and the senator who advised Truman, you can do anything you want with the American people if you scare them enough. Now, suddenly we're scared about headhunting Muslims, and so, the only thing to do is to go kill some more people in Iraq and Syria, because, my goodness, you don't want people cutting off other people's heads, do you? We do that. Yeah. They don't do that.
Well, that's curious. I didn't bring in the piece about beheadings. Enormous scandal about the 2 beheadings of Americans in Iraq, but people have not seen the figures apparently for the number of beheadings in Saudi Arabia, where they are routine. They proceed at the rate of about 1 per day. But they're not Americans, so it never gets noticed here.
And Saudi Arabia is the principal ally of the U.S. in the region, therefore.
Yes. So what do we think about? I don't know what to think about whether Americans support this latest in Syria, whether they understand it, what the kind of questions that are asked on polls that shape the kind of answers that I don't know if Americans do know what to think about it, because when it comes to responses to alleged harm, I mean, this is the trope that Obama keeps playing on. No, what is the phrase he keeps using? Any harm that's done to Americans will be responded to. Well, I guess the conventional wisdom is that Americans buy that. When it's about Americans getting killed and retribution for that, that's where Americans will always draw the line and then support any military action that goes along with that. I don't know if that's really working in this case. I don't know if anybody knows if it's really working. I don't know whether the government really cares whether it's really working. And I don't know whether the government even knows what it's really doing in this so-called response, except Obama dropping a bunch of bombs so that he won't be perceived as weak as the elections, as the November elections come up. God forbid that the Democratic Party should be perceived as being allowing Americans to be killed without killing lots of Arabs.
I think that's true, David. I also think, though, that the administration is running absolutely true to form here of all recent administrations. Whose line is it in this week's New Yorker about for more than a quarter century, every American president has bombed Iraq, and therefore it's no surprise that Obama is bombing Iraq. It's his job. I think that's right, and the only people who are surprised by that are those who believe the notion that Obama was going to be any different. He's doing precisely what's been done by his predecessors. The only thing that's really different is that he's a little better about lying about his reasons for it. There's a certain straightforwardness about the Bush administration, if you can imagine that, in comparison with Obama. But the interests that Bush 1, Clinton, Bush 2, Obama all bombed Iraq, the interests remain the same. Those interests are the interests of the American 1%, and they have primarily to do with the control of the world's greatest store of energy resources, the Middle East. This has been American policy more than a quarter century, going back to the Second World War. Obama is absolutely in line with that, but the specifics of his bombing campaign are a little different. One of the things is that he needs a war. The defense industries are languishing a bit, with the withdrawal such as it is from Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, they don't have to worry quite so much anymore. If you check the stock market this last week, Lockheed Martin and everybody else is up. The defense industries that support America's belligerent foreign policy do very well from it. I think there's another reason, though, beyond the overarching reason of control of the Middle East, and the second reason of the influence of the most important lobby in the country, probably, the defense industry lobby. The third reason is that things are going badly wrong in Europe. The war faction, in the government, which is most of the American government, was on the verge of pulling off a major coup, the creation of a new Cold War and the demonization of a new Hitler in Russia, that is Vladimir Putin. The U.S.-inspired coup in Ukraine and the coup government's aggression against its own citizens in southeastern Ukraine, with American support, provoked Russia. But when Russia responded with objections, plus diplomatic support and covert aid, the storyline that the U.S. put forth was Russia is the enemy of world peace, led by that devil Putin. And this looked pretty good for a while. I mean, this is going well in terms of Americans' economic concern, but it's foundered. It's broken up. And it's broken up in part because the American puppet government in Kiev has found its military collapsing in front of the resistance of Eastern Ukraine, the Donbass region. And that this has put a real spanner in the works for American foreign policy that was going to use this to press forward its economic concerns and economic control of Eurasia. Suddenly we need a new enemy. Well, thank goodness there's one on the horizon.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask. Will the USA be able to hold Europe in line on the sanctions question?
Sanctions against Russia?
Yes, yes. When it's so contrary to their own interests in Europe.
I think that's an open question. And I think that that's not unrelated to the questions of the caliphate and Southwest Asia, because one of the things the U.S. is doing here is telling the NATO members that, hey, you better get your act together and come with us to kill Arabs. That's on the agenda. At this NATO meeting in Wales last week, the U.S. told the European countries, by the way, we want you to ramp up your military, we want you to buy more military equipment, and guess where you're going to buy it from. Right. But we want every NATO country to spend at least 2% of its GDP on military matters, because we need you in Southwest Asia, and more importantly, we need you at Lockheed Martin. Now, with a situation like that, it seems to me that the war policy of the U.S. in Iraq and Syria, and its war policy, because it is that, in Ukraine, are connected.
Well, there's this, appeal to fear constantly. And the Europeans and a lot of other people are being told the big bad Russian bear is coming to get you.
Right.
And if the terrorists in the Middle East don't get you first.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about this. I mean, it's just it's been laid out so clearly, the whole coup against the elected government in Ukraine this past spring, and the events that have transpired since then just have been so well reported on and so revealed in terms of what's going on. Our foreign policy has been so blatantly brutal and arrogant in what it's done. Not that it's any different than what we do in any other part of the world, but who is it who had these hopes for Obama? Who among Obama's supporters now who still have to run in the Democratic Party?
But I think it was honorable to have hopes for Obama, but
supposedly these people who still are running, and people I know, who, I mean, given that they're running at the local level, but still have to somehow fall into line with what's going on at the national and global levels. I mean, when does this whole thing come apart?
But Dave, I'm not sure it was. I'm not sure it was ever together in the sense that what you just sketched as obvious, and I agree with you, it is obvious, is not obvious to the listeners of CNN or of MSNBC. And in fact, if we were to do a poll on this, I would be happy if we could get 2 in 10 of 10 Americans to agree that this was obvious. Although I agree with you, it is obvious.
In hindsight,
Beg pardon?
In hindsight?
No, it's
I think it's obvious in real time.
It's what the U.S. is doing in Europe and in, as far as that matters, in Southwest Asia as well. That is obvious, but it is covered over with such a carapace of propaganda and misrepresentation to the average American that you can't blame that average American for saying, "Oh my God, they're really dangerous people in Asia. We've got to go kill them before they come kill us." Remember 9/11?
I mean, it might be worth drawing a connection to the demonization of Putin, who is, of course, no angel. But the McCarthyite demonization, the new Cold War demonization of, what it's so clear. I mean, people who understand the region, it's so clear what he's about in relation to this issue. And in fact, how he's made prudent choices in terms of not escalating this issue. But how about relating that to the idea that hiring a guy to come to this campus is going to be a threat to Jewish students? I mean, put one alongside the other. They're equally ludicrous. Apparently, it's really easy for people to believe things that are totally ludicrous. Why is that? Is it because they only watch CNN and Fox News?
No.
Do these people never, or do they ever get outside their little bubble?
Do they never listen to us?
Naively, I ask. I mean, there is so much information available, and there is so much dissent, and there is so much misery for people to ask questions. What is really going on here? Do we really want to bomb more people and destroy more lives if people just go along with this?
Yeah, well, how you do it is appealing to the most primitive human emotions and needs: fear, greed, hatred, and the establishment is very good at that.
I guess the difference is that when you appeal to the anti-Putin sentiment, people go back to the Cold War and the big bad Russian bear. But when you do it on this campus, it can't be quite put in the same terms. You can't scare people with a big bad person of Palestinian background. So you have to put it in terms of so-called civility and respect and diversity. So that's the progress, the quote-unquote progress we've made. That these people who are hurting other people are doing it in the name of diversity and civility. Not that that's anything new. And I think somebody made an interesting comment about civility, that to accuse someone of being uncivil is racially charged. And in our society, I think that's a good point. That when the issue of civility is brought in, that's in a sense racially charged. There's a certain history of that which we ought to understand.
The line has become, from the chancellor and now from the president of the university also, that he would have said things that offended and upset and caused psychic pain, apparently, to some students.
This is the trigger line, right?
Yeah.
The trigger, yes.
Yeah.
And he says these things with a straight face.
Yeah.
A man who was
He may even believe them.
A man who was born and lived his life largely in a very different context. I mean, I don't know.
Well, this has become the line in a number of campuses that we can't allow anyone on the campus who might say things that would trigger reactions of fear and upset and would cause some kind of pain and suffering to our students.
Brian, that's a transparent and psychologizing
a
way to maintain the political lines of things that cannot be said.
Yes.
And trying to say, well, was it Abby Hoffman who said God is dead and we did it for the kids.
Yeah.
Abby would understand this. We had to fire these guys, because he might have upset the children.
Yes, yes.
And and although, by the way, that makes sure that some issues, some ideas, some views are not presented in this kind, because it might upset the children.
Yeah, this is all speculation. There's no actual evidence that Professor Salita has ever done this,
or that he's been anything but a very stellar teacher.
It's
Yes,
worse,
The
it's
only
worse than
problem
that.
apparently was being too easy.
Yeah, right.
Apparently didn't want to hurt their feelings by giving bad grades.
Look, we've got to be careful here. We don't want to give up too much there. If he did upset the children,
Yeah.
it may have been a good
So much
idea
the
for the
better,
children
right?
to be upset.
Yeah,
Exactly,
yeah.
right.
If he wasn't upsetting them, it was
he
wasting
wasn't doing his
everyone's
job
time.
right. Yes.
There are good and bad ways to upset students.
Yes.
You don't upset them by making things personal, by accusing, by challenging their identity, so to speak. But you challenge
that
their
the
ideas.
problem?
You challenge their ideas. You challenge their ways of looking at the world, and let their identity take care of itself.
I thought college was for grown-ups, by the way, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, right. Well,
maybe
We've
not.
given up on that.
Is that right? That's
Let's,
gone. Huh?
yeah.
so I mean, what do
Following what's been called the infantilization of everyone.
what do you? I raised the issue
Gone
of the,
especially far here.
I raised the issue of the difference between the hard sciences and the liberal arts or the humanities in this case. I'm wondering what your view of how that might play out, how that goes on this campus. Is it really just? I mean, if I were a liberal arts faculty member, you need a certain number of dissidents to almost have a respectable liberal arts faculty with a few voices, just so you could say that you have those people. But how must those few people, most of whom I know, how must they, and you know as well, how must they feel right now, and what should their strategy be in terms of challenges? They're on a tech campus, they're on an ag campus, they're a minority on this campus. Are we being unfair to the rest of the faculty that they don't appreciate academic freedom, that they can't see the justice of this case, or are they uninformed? Are they afraid?
Yes to
what
all
are
of the
they?
above, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's Upton Sinclair's line, isn't it, that it's difficult to
Yeah.
get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it.
Yeah.
And that I don't mean to suggest bad faith in every case that we're talking about here, as Sinclair's line seems to suggest, but it certainly does exist. And the very real interests, the personal interests involved. What's the line about where you stand depends upon where you sit?
Right,
I
right.
mean,
It's remarkable to me how naive people with enormous reputations in the physical sciences, engineering, agriculture, and so on can be about many moral and political questions. You would hope that there's some transfer of their critical thinking skills and demand for evidence and some kind of scientific basis would transfer over to this other area, but by and large it does not. It becomes a matter of these class signifiers that you were talking about earlier.
As much as Noam Chomsky would like to, as a scientist, would like to think that it would, and is always defending the basic integrity of the hard sciences and the skills that people learn in science. I'm afraid it doesn't transfer in reality quite. I mean, I'm not sure what he thinks of what's going on, but I think he just classifies most people as most privileged people as being generally indoctrinated in the views that he's been trying to criticize for all these years.
Yeah.
it was the late Paul Feyerabend, the anarchist writer on science, and General Gadfly, who wrote at one point that if you actually look at the arguments between Galileo and Cardinal Bellarmine, it's clear that Cardinal Bellarmine wins on logic and analysis, and that Galileo is the one who is making the unallowable logical leaps.
Yeah.
I
think perhaps the question becomes that at the national level, with this value of academic freedom, the AAUP and the legal battles and all this, what value does academic freedom, I mean, I think we're going to have to find out what value academic freedom has in real terms in cases like this. And I think it's a struggle worth fighting. I think it's a struggle worth people making some sacrifices for, not just in the narrow sense of whether people are going to get jobs or not, but I mean, it seems people need to be a little straightforward about what the political agenda behind this is in terms of social change and social justice. I don't think people ought to be afraid to draw those lines.
I think,
Yeah, well, they should, these other people with dissenting views should be a contribution to our rationality and looking at things from other points of view, which most of us need.
Yeah.
And but people are afraid of that.
Well, but I hope dissidents will come to see themselves as more than mascots on liberal arts campuses, just to give some credibility to places that are basically driven by money.
I think part of the problem is that for a lot of people who spent a lot of their lives in universities, as we have, there's a sense that these issues were all decided long ago. When Scott Nearing was fired at the First World for opposing the First World War and helped found the AUP, or after the Second World War during the McCarthy period, or maybe in the Vietnam period, academic freedom was defended and everything was okay, and everything's been ducky for a long time. And I think the shock comes when we realize that academic freedom is defended only when it doesn't make any difference, and in cases where it does make some difference, it's not defended at all, even by people, senior members of this faculty, local newspaper editors, other colleagues at the university, who we would expect to be defending it. They aren't doing it. You've been watching news from Neptune. For the 37th week of 2014, it's the Worse Than Terrorism edition. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight have been David Green and Ron Zook. Our thanks to UPTV, especially Jake, Jason, and Dan. Upcoming programs here on UPTV include Labor's Worldview, Sunday at 4 p.m. by Neptuner David Johnson. And don't miss his Saturday program. Tomorrow morning on WEFT, he has a program featuring the socialist member of the Seattle City Council. That should be a very interesting discussion. That's at 11 o'clock on WEFT radio. See here on UPTV, Progressive Voices, Mondays from 3 to 5, and on WRFU radio, Living Simply on the first Fridays of the month at 8 a.m. with our own Ron Zook. Inshallah, we'll be back next week with a new edition of News from Neptune to remind you, in the words of Edward de Vere, what's past is prologue, what to come, and yours and my discharge. In the meantime, confusion to our enemies, and a good night to you.